The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening all, and welcome to another MLA Productivity and Profitability webinar. Great to have you on board tonight. My name is Peter Haviland and I work for Aggregate Consulting, the business that's facilitating this webinar series on behalf of MLA. The title of tonight's webinar is Resolving Conflict, and we're really lucky to have Neville Brady from browsupconsulting to join us. So before we get into it, most of you have, this is not your first webinar, but for those who haven't attended a webinar, essentially all you have to do is sit back and listen. You may want to minimize your toolbar there so you can see all of Neville's presentation. So simply click on the arrow and then click on it again to get your options back. And the purpose of this is to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar as they come up. We will address them at the end, but it allows us time to collate them and make sure that everyone's questions get answered. All right, and the other thing that is really important is when you exit the webinar, we really appreciate your time just for another 2 to 3 minutes to do a quick survey. And again, your feedback's taken on board for future events. So that's enough on housekeeping. I'll move to our introduction for tonight's speaker. So we're lucky to have Neville, a bit of a systems business guru. Neville's been working in this space for over 25 years, and through his experience with working with numerous businesses in different sectors, he's really focused on now executing a support program, so aligning productivity to best practice in a business. So he's going to go through, obviously, communication and conflict resolution tonight, but he's also going to explore his process, which talks about the actual situation and moving on to how we can improve that business situation to an ideal status. So obviously this is a broad-ranging topic. Neville focuses on leadership, management, people and culture, continuous improvement and operational excellence. And I'm sure the content will speak volumes of what Neil insights Neil has for farm businesses. So that's enough out of me. I'm going to hand over to Neville, and Neville can step you through the presentation. All right, Neville.
Good evening, everyone. Have you got the presentation up, Peter? Yep.
Yep. Just sent you the permission. Yep, can see it now. I'll go on mute now, Neville. Thanks.
So welcome along, everyone. Just look at with a couple of things. Firstly, you'll decide at the end of this presentation whether we're lucky to have Neville online or not. And just in regard to being a guru, I've never been to India, and I don't chant. So I am a country boy. Dad was a shearing contractor. Mum, whimsical and witty woman. So I was brought up on a farm. I can shear a sheep, milk a cow, and had the benefit of a really supportive. I chose the right parents first up. And at 28, I went back to school and did studies in marketing and then counselling psychology. I've been trained in family mediation around that area. And when I paused and went, I've got 3 adult children. And they were teenagers once. And in some ways, I feel a fraud going through conflict resolution. I remember years ago when I ran parenting programs, my oldest bloke said to me, he was about 13 or 14, he said, Dad, when are you doing your next parenting program? And I said, oh, why? And he said, because you behave a lot better when you're actually teaching those. So We're all human. We all benefit and suffer from conflict. And just because I work in this area doesn't mean my life's perfect. It doesn't mean that I've had ups and downs and dealt with teenagers and looking at when they're growing up and cars and all that sort of stuff. So the easiest and hardest thing we ever have to do in this world is work with someone or live with them. And with that, there's always conflict. So tonight, I hope to give you some tips. Now, a couple of things I'm not going to mention. And because there may be some husband and wives partnerships listening to this, so I'm not going to mention that listening cures nagging. I'm not going to mention that because there may be consequences after this. And I'm not going to mention the reason why women live longer than men is because women deserve a rest. Now, I do some work in men's health. It's something with male farm workers. We generally don't put our hands up for help when we're in a conflicting situation. We think we get a stiff upper lip and we battle our way through. So that's a little bit about my background. Now, I'll just take you through some of the things here with conflict and hoping that they make sense. Now, there's different types of conflict. There's attract conflict. And we experienced that today. I went and bought a TV the other day. And there were so many brands, it just created stress. Which one do I pick? All of them look good. There's avoid conflict. I'm attracted to that girl, but I don't want to get rejected. And there's, which is the worst one, which is avoid conflict. It's the toothache and the dentist. Both revolve around pain. So my toothache is, I can just feel it, so I'm not going to do anything about it yet. Generally, it's not until the pain becomes greater than my fear do I go to the dentist. And then the dentist said, Neville, if you had come here 6 months ago, we would have saved the tooth. So one of the biggest things that we see in businesses is the avoidance of conflict, the avoidance of having difficult conversations. Because if I have a chat to old mate, he may get annoyed and then leave, and I'll be in an even worse situation than what I am now. So the different types of conflict are interpersonal conflict. That's when we have arguments with other people. And then there's interpersonal conflict. That's the conflict we have with ourselves. Geez, I shouldn't be drinking so much. I should be getting more exercise. Bloody hell, why did you actually say that? Why didn't you take a deep breath before you did anything? So we have this internal conflict as well. There's also conflict between groups. One at a big scale is over what's happening in Russia. So there's different types of conflicts in between groups, and there's also conflict within groups. Now, tonight I'm going to deal with the interpersonal one and give you some tools around that you could use. Now, I always say you could use, not should. You determine whether you feel that they're worthwhile for you, because I don't want a phone call and say, I tried that and it really turned to crap. And we're also going to talk about, I'm going to give you a tip for those who have staff, 2 or 3 staff, how to resolve some conflict within the group. So generally speaking, they're the 4 types of conflict. Now, when we're talking to people about conflict, we often ask them, if conflict were a dog, what type of dog would it be? So if you're thinking now, what type of dog would it be? Generally, it comes under one of 2 types. It's the small, yapping, annoying type, and annoyance comes under anger, and anger is for fight. Or it's a scary dog, and fear is for flee. Now, when we're talking about conflict, people have a very narrow view of what conflict is that ties into that fight or flight process. But conflict can be fantastic. Conflict can create new ways of doing things on farm. If there wasn't conflict, someone wouldn't have invented the wheel. There wouldn't be modern medicine. So one of the things that we try and do is get people's view of conflict to shift a bit, to say that conflict is actually what drives stimulation, curiosity, and change and continuous improvement. Now, conflict generally occurs when there's a gap between what is happening and what we all feel should be happening. Now, in every group, no matter what, whether it's a family group, a social group, a community group, a sporting group, there's always conflict. There's always gaps between what those group members feel is actually happening and what the group members feel should be happening. Now, I've been married to the same woman for 30, she'd know exactly, but it's somewhere around 38 years. 27th of March, I've got the date. Now, we've had a few blues in those times. And when people argue, it doesn't mean they don't love each other. And just because they don't argue doesn't mean they do. Now, she would be able to give you a list of things that she wants me to stop doing and start doing and keep doing. So the bigger the gap, the greater the stress and the greater the risk. When the gap's between what's actually happening and what you feel should be happening, it's that really dull, low-level toothache. But over several years, it can build up. So we've done audits with probably now 20 farms. Now, if you want to improve your farm outcomes, it means we need to improve farm inputs. Now, we've measured farm inputs around leadership, staff engagement, accountability, continuous improvement, planning and application, work environment, and work health and safety. We've measured what all the people in those groups feel is actually happening in that group and what should be happening in that group and quantified the gap. And here's the results of around 20 farm audits. You'll see there it's red. When there's a 20-point gap, we put it in red, which means we've got to stop and fix this. If it's, let's say, just over 10, that's the amber one with work environment. It means it's a pretty good result, but do we need to discuss some of these gaps? And you'll see the results in work health and safety. Now, where we get the gaps from, under leadership and management, for example, one of the statements that we get people to rate their level of agreement with, and then their level of importance that they place on that statement. So one of the questions under leadership that we put in there is the business has very clear goals, targets, performance indicators, values that we're all expected to achieve. Now, they rate their level of agreement with that from strongly agree, agree, somewhat agree, disagree, strongly disagree. So you see there's a 64% agreement to it, but they all agree that they should be at 96% importance on it. So we know there that we have to do some work around that area. The next one is planning and application. When we get agro reports and things like that, we follow it to the letter and the timing of it is spot on. Again, there's a big gap there that creates conflict. Engagement and accountability. One of the statements in there is everyone reports at each monthly meeting on their areas of responsibility. They report to the group. Now, they rate that as disagree, but they all rate it as very important. But the trouble is, The informality around farms and farm management, we don't have a monthly report. We don't have a monthly conflict resolution meeting where we can discuss things. Now, at one client's place, it was a transport company. It was a really combative, argumentative workplace. So we changed some things, which you'll see on the next slide. We got all the 6 managers to, got them together. They met once a month. And in their report, they had to report on who they would like to thank or acknowledge for making their job easier. And they also had to report on what they were struggling with. Now, when they had to report on who they'd like to thank or acknowledge, it changed the work environment from being adversarial to being cooperative. So there's the gaps. Now, a lot of what we argue over in a business is because of this next slide. People argue in businesses, and we often make the mistake that there's a personality clash or they just don't get on, when really there's a conflict of over whose role it is and what authority it is, which is structures. The more poorly a business structured, the more conflict there is. So this is a family mediation model. When we go into a family mediation, we just work on the structures first. Like when I was growing up, we always had a meal together and we always had to ask, may I leave the table? That's a family structure. Some families that we work into, there's no boundaries for these kids. So they just keep going until they find the boundary where there's the Mr. Plod policeman there. So part of it is reducing the conflict, is having really good structures within your business. Role clarity, targets, who reports on this, processes, procedures. And we get staff involved in that to develop what they are. The next one we look at is resources. People are resources, information, equipment, technology are all resources. Then we look at competency. Do you know what to do and how to do it? And then commitment, ambition or attitude. So if you want to improve the outcomes of your business and achieve operational excellence, they're all driven by the quality of your business inputs, which are your structures, resources, competency, commitment, in each of those areas there. In each of those areas there. Oh, and one of the questions that we ask in the farming audit of the staff and managers is, what would you like our help? Hope this process helps you fix, improve or achieve. It always comes under 3. They want more formality, they want more consistency, and they want more accountability. So there's business reasons why there's gaps between your actuals and ideals. Business gaps or conflict is due to no formal agreed structures or processes. So the action there is to discuss and document them. I was in a corporate farm and they were complaining that staff weren't adhering to the speed limits. So they had a speed limit, which there was an agreed structure, a policy. They had their signs up around the place to say no more than 50 kilometres an hour, which is a resource. They knew people could read it, so they knew what they should be doing and they weren't doing it. So they challenged that this was a staff commitment issue, but when we asked them, do you guys adhere to the speed limits around the farm? Guess what they said? They said no. And I said, well, you've got 2 choices, boys. You can either pull back and drive at 50 kilometres an hour, or you can change the speed limit. Which one do you want to do? Now, hypocrisy creates cynicism. Now, when my kids were growing up, I told them not to hit their siblings. So what I had to do is model that and not hit them. And one day Matthew hit Kate and I said, what did you do, mate? And he said, I got angry. And I said, is that why you hit my daughter? He said, yes. And I said, well, I'm angry with you now and I'm not hitting you, am I? He said, no. And I said, do you appreciate that? He said, yes. I said, well, never hit my daughter. That's modelling. That's the action there. Or inadequate resources. We don't have the resources needed to do the task properly. Now, you guys are time poor because Getting staff's a huge issue. And it's easier said than done than say, actually, we've got to provide the right resources. The next reason are people reasons. So we never blame people until we actually go through the business reasons first. The conflict is due to low or moderate competencies. We don't know what to do or how to do it. So the action is explaining, telling, measure, feedback and model. Or low, moderate commitment. Despite knowing what to do and how to do, we didn't follow agreed structures. We took a shortcut. Now, I had a chat to a person in a business the other day who wasn't doing his pre-startups. And the boss said, I'm just going to have to tell him again. And I said, hang on a minute, that's a competency issue. That's a competency thing you're trying to fix, and it's a commitment issue that needs to be fixed. So when it's about asking, so I asked this young fella in, Sid, and I said, Sid, can you tell me the process you should be following when you do your startups? So I asked him, I didn't tell him. And he told me exactly. And I said, you're not doing it, are you? And he said, no, I'm not. And I said, well, tell me what will happen to your employment here if you choose not to do the startups. He said, oh, I'll be out of a job. And I said, is that what you want? He said, shit, no. And I said, good on you, Sid. See you next week and we'll do a follow-up to see whether you're doing it now. I didn't tell him, I asked him and went through that process. There's also external reasons for gaps between what's actually happening in your business and what should be happening. Droughts, floods, all that, stock prices, input prices with glyphosate and all that sort of thing. So if the conflict is due to external factors, you just review the WorkSafe hierarchy of controls or the CI process and get the best fixed. So that's it on a page, everyone. Now, if you want this information, contact Peter afterwards. It's available. Structure, resources, competency, commitment. I walk into a business and they tell me everything that's going on about between staff, and I just start with structures first. Everyone calms down. Now, interpersonal conflict. The biggest thing with managing interpersonal conflict is managing your own emotions. In our household, we had permission, if I look shitty, for people to tell me, Dad, eyebrows up, because bad pushes out good. I came home one day and Brenda said, Nev, eyebrows up. Especially at blokes' moods, it can spread right throughout the group. We did some men's health nights throughout Outback New South Wales back in 2004 because of the high suicide rates and that out there. And I said, boys, go home with your eyebrows up. And we followed up with the partners and I said, what have you noticed about your fellas? And one lady said, thank you for eyebrows up. It's changed the whole mood of the house. So when I'm talking to my kids and I feel shitty and angry or upset, I always say to myself, eyebrows up, because I don't want to come across as stern, because that manner gets in the road. And I remember my youngest son, who's now 32, at 18, he phoned me up and said, Dad, when are you going to be home? And I said, soon, why? He said, oh, no, we need to have a chat, but shit, can your eyebrows be up? And I walked in with my eyebrows up and Brenda looked really worried. And I said, what's going on, son? He said, Dad, I got called for drink driving. And I said, did you? And I really hard to keep my eyebrows up. And I said, right, I'm going to have to go for a walk. You be here when I get back. So sometimes it's really difficult. If we can't manage our own emotions, it's very difficult to manage the situation. Eyebrows up, boys. Keep your eyebrows up. Don't be a stern, grumpy parent when you're talking to staff. Now, there's a VIP approach that we go through. Validate is critical. We do an activity in an activity where the story is this. We tell people this and it's Chinese whispers. One person tells it to the next, over 6 people, and the story is this. You're on a crowded train in some capital city in Australia. There's 2 people standing in the middle of the train carriage. One is a very tall, well-dressed Aboriginal in a really nice suit. And this bloke is pooping his pants because right in front of him, there's a short, stocky white man, a construction worker, hard hat on, bib and brace overalls, and he's got a finger in the Aborigines' face with a knife in his other hand about to attack him. Now, when that's told from one to another, to another, to another, to another, very often, 6 times, 7 times out of 10, the Aboriginal ends up with a knife. True. Especially when we did that in Walgett. Happened in the next telling of it. So we all change what we hear. So when I'm in a conflict situation, if I'm talking to you, I will repeat back what I've heard you say just to make sure I haven't changed it. Then I'll let you know how I'm feeling. Then I'll investigate and discuss some coulds. But if you don't validate the emotions first, those emotions will get in the road of calm, collected, with our eyebrows up, problem solving. So we discuss and agree on some coulds, then work out whether they become shoulds, and then we validate. Now, one person said to me once, if someone repeated back what I said, I'd bloody thump them. And very quickly I said, so you'd get angry and violent if I repeated back what you just said? And he said, yeah, I would. And he didn't even know I was doing it. Validate. Boys, when your wives come home, please don't solve their problems. Just listen and validate. They can solve their problems, but blokes, we're fixers. We go straight to problem solve, which actually escalates the conflict. And did I mention to you that nagging is fixed by listening? But I won't mention that again. Now, B equals P plus S. B is behaviour, P is for personality, and S is for situation. Now, this is how we actually create greater workplaces and environments. We ask staff what makes the ideal work colleague, and they tell us. Now, in this, before this, I just need to explain internal locus of control and external locus of control. I'd rather employ someone with an internal locus of control, not external. Now, we ask staff what makes the ideal work colleague, and we put it into this, which is really simple. Above the line thinking and behaviours help create great workplace culture and success. Above the line and below the line. Now, below the line attitudes and behaviours are argues, problem focused, inconsiderate, defensive, excuses, blocks, criticises, blames, grumpy, eyebrows down, pessimistic. No one wants to work in that environment, and no one wants to work for a boss that has those things. Above the line is takes responsibility, listens. Did I tell you that listening kills nagging? I think I did. Optimistic, seeks and provides constructive feedback. Caring, empathy, takes action, solution focus, sees possibilities, eyebrows up. And this is the sign we put in workplaces, especially where we have our monthly meetings. So life is about making a choice. Life is a contact sport, things happen. It's our response that determines the outcome. A friend of mine, Butch Olney, fell under a train at 15 years of age and had one leg taken off below his knee and one near his hip. He said, Neville, either I can concentrate on the million things I can't do, or I can choose to concentrate on the million things I can do. I'll concentrate on what I can do. I took him fishing with another mate. They hadn't met each other. And when Mick got out of the car, he asked Butch, what can I do to help, Butch? He said, you can help by pissing off out of the road. Now, he has a high locus of control. So the event, the stressor, plus our response equals a plus or minus outcome. So the VIP approach is validate, investigate, problem solve. Now, when I was a kid, I said to Mum, everyone's giving me the shits. She said, sweetheart, everyone can't be wrong. I thought, you're on the list too now. But when everyone's giving us the irrits, everyone can't be wrong. I can approach things from a parent-adult state, a child ego state, or an adult ego state. Parent ego state is when my eyebrows are down. Do it from an adult. Listening, did I mention listening kills nagging? To improve your business structures, more formality, more consistency, and more accountability. Your staff are wanting it. Very often we deal with people who don't know how to put those structures in place. And please, boys, don't be stubborn. Don't be stubborn. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. It's okay not to have all the answers. And it's okay to go and see a health professional when you're not sick. Nothing will shrink if we do that. So I hope that's helped. It's really quick, 30 minutes. There are some follow-up notes with Peter at Aggregate that they can send out. I've got a little pocket conflict resolution card that you can keep in your pocket, which is a resource that in that resource explains the structure. But structure, improve your structures, you'll reduce conflict. 20% of the conflict is the issue. 80% of the conflict is how we react to that 20%. So deal with emotions first. So thank you. I had to finish in 30 minutes, which I think I'm nearly spot on. That was quick. Your questions?
Thanks, Neville. Yeah, bang on the mark there. I'm just going to grab control back and put up a few slides to finish.
Yep.
So bear with me, everyone. And don't sell yourself short there. Those are points that you succinctly covered off. Good life skills for everyone, I think. There has been a comment before I get into questions. Apparently, Walgett always gets mentioned in these kind of talks, Neville. I don't know. Hopefully, there's no one from Walgett on board. But yeah.
Well, Walgett was about the best place I've ever visited. There you are.
Okay.
I also did a men's. Can everyone still hear me, Peter?
Yes, they can. Yep.
I also did a men's health night at Brewarrina. And I put up all the death rates, the differences between men and women, which is our death rate's twice that of women up to the age of 60, yet we access Medicare services 30% less than women. And I told the men of Brewarrina this story about how a bloke was mowing his lawns in Swan Hill, where I'm from, and every couple of metres he had to stop to catch his breath, and he had a pain in the chest. And I posed a rhetorical question to the men of Brewarrina. And I said, boys, guess what he needed to do? And this lone hand went up at the back of the hall. And he said, I said, yes. He said, old mate needs to go to the doctor to get a prescription for a frickin' ride-on mower. And I thought, welcome to Brewarrina.
Okay. So everyone should now be able to see my screen again. And I just flag with everyone, we've got another webinar in 2 weeks' time. That'll be looking at carbon and a practical, obviously a theme that gets a lot of press nowadays, but the purpose of this event will be to cover off practical developments around agriculture and what farmers can do in the carbon space. So we're not talking about planting trees in this event. We're actually, unpacking what the carbon cycle means and how producers can influence it. So, and just before we get into the first question, I'll remind everyone again, please, if you could complete the survey on the way out. Contact me if you want the notes from Neville. They won't go on the website, but you can request them directly from me. And yeah, MLA's got some other resources there as well, and this webinar will be taped. So you've got a lot of feedback in the questions here, Neville, so I'll pass that on, and obviously positive stuff. Someone asked their husband couldn't hear what cures nagging, and I think simple messages, but again, the way you communicate, it's really clear, so and useful. The first question here, Neville, is what do you think of exit interviews for employees leaving?
Look, exit interviews, I did 6 exit interviews over 12 months with, I think they're a great thing. If you get an external person to do it, because a lot of people bite their tongues and sometimes don't tell you the real reason. Now, a boss at this place got his office manager to do some exit surveys of 3 agronomists that left the business. When I was helping out there, I got a little bit suspicious because there were 3 female agronomists. So I did an exit survey and I found out that there was some really old-fashioned language in this place. Like one of the female agros was on the forklift and she tooted the horn when they came in within range of someone, which was the policy, and someone said, "Oh, you're getting horny today." Now, in every business, there'll be what's called defection drivers. They'll be low levels. They're just normal living and working together stuff. So, Peter, I can forward to you some exit survey templates, but I just think they're a ripping thing to do if you get an independent person to do it, because often we don't get the real reason. Now, the research shows that 70% of people who leave a business do so because of strained relationships within that business. That's the biggest defection driver in a business, strained relationships, people who don't get along. So I think they're a good idea.
Good. And yeah, so you've had a few follow-up questions on that, and you've already answered the one about who should run it. So it should be someone external to
Yes.
their direct supervisor.
Yes. Peter, it's hard to challenge up. And
sorry?
plus, it's hard to challenge up. It's hard to challenge up to authority. And plus, I've probably got someone's name there down as a referee for my next job.
Yeah. Exactly. A quick, easy question here I can answer for you, Neville, is this recorded? Yes. And a few people have queried whether there's benefit in replying it to a group of staff in their care. And what do you think of that?
Yeah. Yes, like you know your staff more than what I do. Sometimes if there's strained relationships and we start talking about it and there's no follow-up, talking about expectations, if there was one thing that I'd ask you to tell you guys that you could do, is ask staff what makes the ideal work colleague, document it, give it back to people and say, this is our standards here, which can really help. But if you just talk about something and don't change a structure or a procedure, it can create increased staff's expectations that something's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, they can be really disappointed and morale can drop to a lower level. Now, one of the biggest problems in groups is someone who doesn't pull their weight or creates rework for others. Now, the ones that care the most get hurt the most. They're the ones that get most frustrated. And the last ones you want to piss off in your business are those who care the most. So if you wanted to replay this, please contact Peter and Peter, I'll write up a bit of a process that they could follow to introducing this to the group. But please have a structure in place or something that changes as a result of that. The last thing you want to do is talk about something and then it doesn't change. It just frustrates people.
Okay. Yeah, great point. Following through is really important. So the easy questions are out of the way, Neville. A few more challenging ones, and so there's 3 in total. First one is, where does the culture in a business start?
Really good question. I'm just going to Google the answer. Culture in a business. One of the questions we ask in some of the audits is, if our workplace were a dog, it would be a, and we try and get them to pick a dog. One person in one business said, I don't know what type of dog it is. It's sort of happy to see you when you're front on, but as soon as you turn it back, it bites you on the arse. So culture is born out of rituals and standards and behaviours. Now, many years ago, my dad is still alive, thank goodness. He was a 6'2" shearer. He's a bit smaller now. And Mum, I didn't know Dad was home. And Mum went to smack me. And Mum had a cow prodder, by the way, and no cows. And she had 4 boys. When you got a job of that, you lost a bit of bladder control. And she went to smack me and I grabbed her hand. And I realised I was stronger than Mum. So I grabbed the other hand and went, clap hands, never smacking me again. I didn't know Dad was home. And very quietly, he said, son, that's my wife. Now, when my kids were growing up, if they were abusive to their mother, I used to say, that's my wife. If they were behaving badly or violent to my kids, I used to say, that's my daughter. No one hits my daughter. And my son the other day, who's got 4 kids of his own now, 2 twins, joy oh joy, he said, William, that's my daughter. Now, that's culture that can go through generations. But culture's built, not what people stand for. You know, you see words on a wall about we value respect, we value this, we value that, which sets culture. But it's what you won't stand for that sets culture. It's what you say, hang on a minute, there's a boundary line, don't step over. That's what sets culture. And culture, I've never walked into a family mediation and say, shit, this is all the kids' fault. And I've never walked into a business and said, shit, this is the staff's fault. And in fact, one manager, this owner of this transport company, this alpha, this aggressive, domineering bloke, I actually got him aside after 3 months and I said, you are and I used the words, the F word and the worst one. And he said, you can't talk to me like that. And I said, that's a very good point, Ken, and you can't talk to your staff like that either. Culture is created by leaders. Family culture is created by parents. It's never a child issue and it's never a staff issue.
Yeah, the behaviour you walk past is the standard you condone, isn't it?
So it's what we won't stand for, not what we do stand for.
Yeah. Now, some sort of situational questions around staff directions. So this person's having an issue with a staff member. They've been instructed to do something and they haven't. They've been reminded and it still doesn't occur. What the question is, how can we identify what's actually stopping them from doing the task?
Okay.
Is it deliberate or is it passive avoidance? What are your tips there?
Very good point. Look, one of the things is if we, and I put that map up really quickly, I'd start at structure and say, is there a job description? Is it explained in there what the roles are and responsibilities are? Tick. But usually, simple things don't need to be put in a job description. But if you want to start at the structure bit, is it a competency issue? Is it a competency they don't know what to do or how to do it? Or is it a commitment issue? Now, a lot of the times it's a commitment issue. So the commitment issue is to go through that VIP process, validate. Let's say Peter, let's say the issue is coming to work late, right? I can say, I validate. Peter, is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions? Quickly role play this out, Pete.
Yes, yep.
Peter, ask a couple of questions?
Yep.
Now, Peter, where are my eyebrows? Will they be up or down?
They'll be up.
Absolutely. If I have them down, in communication there is matter. That's what we're talking about. Method. That's what we're doing. We're doing it face-to-face, verbal communication. But manner is everything. People may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So, Peter, it seems that you have been challenged just closing gates when you go through them. Would that be correct?
Yep.
So you agree that you're leaving the gates open and not shutting them, is that correct?
Yeah. Takes too much time.
So you feel that it's too much time for you to shut the gates, is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, I'll come back and do it later.
So what should you do, Peter?
I should get out, open the gate, move through the gate, get off the bike and close the gate again.
And is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, it'll stop cattle getting out, stop getting out.
And that reduces rework, doesn't it?
Yep. Yeah, we won't have to draft them up again.
Peter, am I being fair here and asking you to close the gates?
Yep, no, I can do that.
Excellent. Now, just with no time, around here we work on a priority mindset, not a time mindset, Peter.
Yep.
So I want the gates to be a priority of yours. Is that fair?
Yep. I'll make time for it.
So from now on, you're going to make time. From now on, you will shut the gates. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Yep. No problem, Neville. I'll make sure I shut the gates after I go through them.
Thanks, Peter. And guess what will happen if you don't?
We're going to have a pretty serious conversation. That's not going to be good.
No, and you'd like to avoid that, wouldn't you? I know I would.
Yep.
Good. Excellent. So we just go through that validate, investigate, problem solve. And by me repeating back, so is this fair? Am I being reasonable? Forces Peter to go into his adult ego state, not his parent or child. Saying this isn't fair, you're picking on me. So at the end of it, I always ask, am I being reasonable? Is this fair? And it forces you to be an adult, Peter, didn't it?
Yeah.
Now, this is general advice only. There's usually so much more behind it, but it's just general advice. In case it turns to poo, I wasn't even on this seminar.
Yep.
But best of luck with that.
All right. Now, a bit of a three-part question, and I'll just try and paraphrase this a bit. So the situation is, I'm assuming a manager or a new owner to the business has been confronted by staff about past grievances. Doesn't specify whether they're managers or staff members. And certain staff in that business are known to be problematic or flagged by previous managers or overseers that have moved on. So I guess what we're trying to work out is how to address past grievances and then also stop old managers or staff being scapegoats for situations that have happened.
Look, this is a bit difficult, but if I'm reading the tea leaves right here, there seems to be maybe one or two agitators that are impacting on the rest of the group.
Sounds like it. Yeah, sounds like it from what the limited details we have here.
Now, I'm only guessing, right? So I'm taking a bit of a leap here, and this is general. I could be way off. Now, in groups, generally people transfer through one of three camps. Advocates, come on, let's do this. Supporters, the ones that go along with it, and then saboteurs. Now, I can saboteur things subconsciously because I haven't got the competency. You haven't told me I need to close the gates or how to clean the tanks. So I'm incompetent, but not in a conscious way, right? But some people, you can get agitated in small clumps of staff in some businesses where the bad attitudes push out good and they're agitators. Now, if you picture a mobile above a kid's cot, now there's 2 or 3 big ones and there's half a dozen small ones. If I flick one of the smaller ones, generally that whole mobile doesn't move much. But if I flick some big ones, the whole dynamic of the group changes. So I can't get into specifics as far as grievances. Like sometimes people make bullets and fire others. One of the ways that we settle people down in a business is by setting work colleague standards. And we did this the other day in a business. We set work colleague standards that always come under these headings: punctuality, work ethic, work quality, emotional maturity. And that's just one of personality traits of EQ, being stable, not getting snarly, bitchy, moany behind other people's backs, and being engaged. So it always comes under 5 areas. We've got those 5 areas listed. If you want to contact Peter, you'll be able to get a copy of them. Now, in this work group, we got the 5 biggest influences in this work group, and they rated each other against each one of these qualities. And Lou came up in this business as a 25% agreement around Lou's emotional maturity and agitating and creating a poor work environment. Now, when Lou got that information back, we sat down with him and had the conversation about, really, do you want to fix this score or do you want help writing your resume? But we didn't tackle it until we had that structure in place. We always go back to that structure to follow in that link. Now, whoever wrote that question, not that I'm touting for business, whoever want that question, you can get in contact with Peter, and I'm more than happy to follow up at no charge. I'm not touting for business here. But if you want to have a chat for 45 minutes, just to clarify that, please, Peter's got my contact. And it's at no charge. I'm not touting for business.
I'll pass that on. I've already been in contact with that producer about some things, so there's no issue there. And yeah, your assessment there, or how we pulled that together, was bang on. So yeah, useful advice there, and you thank for the feedback. So that brings us to a close. Thanks again, Neville, for great insights and complex subject matter, but you instilled some really clear, concise messages.
Can I just one other thing?
Yep.
One other thing?
Yep.
Task and maintenance behaviours. Task actions get things done. Maintenance behaviours work on good relationships while we get things done. Praising, encouraging, celebrating are all maintenance actions that are most often missing in a business. We're really good at the task. We're not so good at the maintenance.
Yeah.
So maintenance, guys. And did I mention to you that listening cures nagging?
Well, I think it's the most entertaining webinar we've had in a while, Neville, so a lot of humour. But thanks again to everyone for tuning in. Please remember your exit surveys, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks again, Neville.
Right, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.